Autonomy and agency are the key for any kind of individual expression of creativity. Autonomy and agency, in our view, are the key goal of any kind of education system, should be the goal of any individual. For us, it's key because we see that as the main ingredient for entrepreneurial excellence and the wealth creation that we're looking for at Orange Capital Partners. We therefore make a suggestion that instead of obsessing about schools and grades, people should be a lot more interested in their own autonomy and agency. What is it they can do? What is it they can contribute? And then, of course, they have to calibrate that with the kind of value they can create. And we as investors have to calibrate this autonomy and agency as well. But the point here is that the whole conversation about individual creativity is not just a nice to have. It is the ultimate source of growth for an economy and the ultimate source of wealth. This is the Not Even Wrong podcast. It's October 26, 2020. This is Krim Delko. For the day, the fund is down 2.5%. The market is down 1.86%. For the year, we are up 204%. The market is up 5.5%. We've been talking a lot about the inclusion of David Deutsch's book, The Beginning of Infinity, as part of our principle stack. And this is another explanation for why this book is so key. And I want to jump right into it. So we have this everlasting conversation in the US about education and the school system and why it's inadequate and why it's not adequate, etc. This podcast episode is not about the school system, but I want to just borrow one aspect of the education conversation and then tie it together with David Deutsch's ideas of creativity and expression of freedom and our idea of uniqueness, expression of freedom, and the agency to develop new things as part of the wealth creation process. So in the education system, the question is, why can't everybody do well? Well, by definition, of course, not everybody can do well, but this is not the point. The point is that we believe that anybody who goes to school, anybody who is exposed to the big questions of where should I go to school, what kind of education should I get, the question should be, what is the kind of agency and autonomy I can get from the system? Because ultimately, the source of wealth for any individual is the amount of autonomy they can get and the amount of agency they can express, because those are the only ways you can actually generate wealth. Let that sink in a bit. So again, it's not about doing well in the rat race. It's not about having good grades, getting hired by a prestigious law firm. None of these things can be the goal of every individual. It makes no sense, because the only source of happiness, the source of actual wealth, which we define as the amount of freedom a person has in life, and to our extent, to some extent, that is the happiness you can have, the amount of freedom that you have in your life, which is expressed in the autonomy and the agency you have in what you do. That has to be the end goal. And the school system, in our view, is there to get the basics. So to use Maslow's hierarchy, there is a similar hierarchy in education where, look, you need to know how to write and read, you need to know math. There are fundamental things you need to know. In our view, this is provided by the state. You don't have to waste money on private schools whatsoever to get that knowledge. The question then, when you get to higher education, starting with high school and then all the way up to college and master's and PhD, the question there is, what kind of autonomy do I get from the system? So for example, if you're very gifted in physics and you choose to go to a physics faculty and get a PhD, and you have the ability to express your own views, you have to become, as Peter Thiel says in his book, a monopoly of one. If you can do that, then you should go to that faculty that can give you the most autonomy, which means that number one, they have to be open-minded to let you do what you are good at. And second, they also have to be good in a field and have some leverage for you so you can express yourself in that particular field. You might be very good at theoretical physics, not so good at experimental physics, and that particular faculty should have those types of ingredients. As you can see in my explanation here, there has been no mention of things like status, pedigree, none of that. It makes no difference, because your autonomy and your ability to express agency, in fact, is not just not related to status and pedigree, it's most of the time inhibited. So if you go to a very prestigious school, you have to follow their rules, etc., and it's very difficult to express autonomy. Now, somebody else might be in a position where they are going to a very prestigious school, but their real skill is maybe in developing certain types of technologies. Let's just say, for example, they're incredibly skilled at programming for artificial intelligence and solving the vision problem. Now, that person is probably much better off getting a fast degree at whatever place they can get it, and then go work for Tesla or Amazon or one of these companies that is trying to tackle the vision problem. And I can keep going on. Of course, there are a lot of people, and this is also out of Peter Thiel's book 0 to 1, there are a lot of people that are tied up in the rat race, which is the race that you go to a prestigious high school, a prestigious college, a prestigious master, then you work for a prestigious here, prestigious there. You end up being unhappy because a definition of happiness in our movie is that you have autonomy and agency. This is the definition of happiness. And it ties back to yesterday's episode, which is the measure of wealth is freedom. And in order to generate wealth, you need to be able to express freedom. It goes both ways. So this ties back to all the way back to the education system. And that's why we at Orange Capital Partners are so concerned about the education system, and in particular concerned about the way companies like Tesla can hire. Because how can you hire people from a conventional legacy system that is based on status, pedigree? People have lots of debt, which is, milking people a little bit like the Catholic Church in the pre-Lutheran time. How can you hire such people and then expect them to have creativity, to be expressive, to develop new ideas, and to disrupt technologies and existing status quos? How can you expect that from people that have been educated in legacy systems? It's almost an oxymoron, and that is part of our concern. So I want to go back now to the education system and then explain why we believe that the solutions for the education system are, they start with the individual, that they are actually very closely tied to our own principal stack at Orange Capital Partners, and that gives us also a lot of peace of mind that we are really doing the right thing here, because we are not just making money, but we are also propagating ideas that are good for everybody. So let's start with the education system. Human capital is the only capital you can gain without any kind of, let's say, well, I shouldn't say that. Human capital is, there's two types of capital. There's human capital and there is financial capital. And actually, both of them can be inherited. Both of them can be gifted. You can get lucky and all of that. So I don't want to say that human capital is something you can only earn by merit and financial capital is something you can get from your parents. It's actually almost the same thing. So in order to have wealth in life, in order to be free, you need both. You need financial capital and you need human capital. Typically in capitalism, human capital develops financial capital. So a Rockefeller needs to first develop his human capital to then become rich. Same with Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos. It is very difficult to become rich if you don't have human capital, i.e. if you have no education, if you're not smart, and none of that stuff. Now, let's get to the human capital side, which is the focus from our perspective, because it's our business to provide you with financial capital. So if you have the right human capital, we're pretty happy to give you the financial capital. So let's talk about human capital. What is human capital? Human capital is the ability to express creativity, to have explanations for technological processes that solve particular problems. Now, in our case, we would like you to develop the kind of human capital that helps you develop creativity in solutions that develop disruptive technologies. So, for example, if you can have human capital in the questions of solving the vision problem for AI, if you have human capital in the questions of solving the battery problem that is Tesla's tackling. So pretty much any kind of human capital that is necessary for Tesla to succeed, in our view, is the kind of human capital that is worth pursuing at least for the next 10 years. Tesla is a good example. It's not the only company. There's other companies that we cherish a lot, like Amazon. There is even companies like Boston Beer, Square. I believe they all have skill sets, requirements for skill sets that are very useful for today. I would say even things like, for example, the UFC is unbelievably good at marketing. They're developing new types of marketing. Their fights, which I think is very interesting. They're looking at social media in a very different way, particularly for the traditional sport. So there's not just, all I'm trying to say is it's not just Silicon Valley, but let's stick with Silicon Valley. We're based in Silicon Valley, and we are devoting our resources to mostly Silicon Valley type solutions. So let's stick with Silicon Valley. So if you want to evolve as a human being and end up working for a company like Tesla, how can you do that? Well, I think there's a couple of things you can do. You can, of course, go to a prestigious university, but my feeling is that your abilities maybe to get hired is relatively good, but then to succeed is very small unless you have certain ingredients, and that is the ability to express yourself, to develop creative knowledge. And according to David Deutsch in his book, The Beginning of Infinity, that is to find new explanations for processes in nature. So you observe nature and you find new explanations. Deutsch is very explicit about that it's all about the explanations. Proofs, mathematical deduction, all of these things, they are just ways to test our explanations. But real progress, human progress, is predicated on finding better explanations for whatever problem you're trying to tackle. So if it's a problem of the battery technology, you have to find an explanation for why you can store more electrons in a certain chemistry versus another one, or why you can charge faster, or both, how you can lower cost. You have to find better explanations. A lot of those explanations are simply a function of experience, and that's why we believe that a company like Tesla gains in value just by continuing to innovate and building the innovation stack. That is just another way to say they have found explanations then on top of each other and kind of compound the explanations, or they have the potential to find better explanations because they found explanations before. So this would be another way to explain the innovation stack by Jim McKelvey. But let's get back to the education side. We believe this is so crucial. We can't emphasize it enough. Education is not just a social problem, it's a business problem. And I want to get back to the question of what should I do if I'm looking at an education. For example, we have a 13-year-old son right now. Here's what we're doing. We're thinking about what high school, what college, how should he develop his human capital and his financial capital. The two ingredients to generate agency and autonomy are financial capital and human capital. And our solution is to use public resources, Khan Academy, etc., for the creation of knowledge. Knowledge is a commodity, can be acquired through resources that are, first of all, definitely not expensive like private schools, but more importantly, they are even better if you go and look for them and you find the ones that you need. So we're gonna help him build knowledge through accessing the public school system, Khan Academy, etc. And then we're going to build financial capital by reinvesting the money that we would be spending for private schools, so something between $20,000 and $50,000 per year, into Tesla stock, and let that accumulate. So by the time he finishes college, he will have the knowledge and he will have the financial capital. Now, the autonomy and agency is something he has to build himself. That's not something that he can learn in any kind of school. That is a culture we have to nourish, we have to help him build. But in the end, that is up to him. By definition, agency and autonomy are something you have to develop yourself. So that is not something we can do. So as parents, what we can do is basically not waste money on private schools and reinvest the money in something that compounds, so he has enough financial and human capital. Key for wealth generation and freedom. Now, let me define agency and autonomy. Agency is just another word for having impact. And autonomy is to find a unique way, to have a secret, in Peter Thiel's words, or in David Deutsch's words, to have a unique explanation, a new explanation for a problem, and therefore bring innovation to the world. That's in a nutshell how we think about education. And we of course everybody should do whatever they want, and this is not something that we want to enter now in the conversation, what should education be, and etc. But we're thinking along the lines that if people take the risk to educate themselves in the way that we're thinking about educating our son, then there is a much higher chance that they can develop agency and autonomy, and therefore a much higher chance that they can either become an entrepreneur and build something valuable, or be an employee of something like that, which is building something valuable, or become an investor like us, compete with us, work for us, but do the same kind of investing in disruptive technologies with large impact. There is no other way. If you run the rat race, and this is also deeply elaborated in Peter Thiel's 0 to 1, if you run the rat race, by definition, you cannot be unique. You cannot have unique explanations for a problem. You have to either follow everybody else, or at best, augment explanations. In other words, you can be incremental, but you cannot be unique. You cannot be different. And I think anybody who's worked in any kind of prestigious institution, or learned in a prestigious institution, no matter what, it is very difficult to be unique and develop your own thoughts. But that is exactly what it takes to build wealth. So there is a real problem in society, and that's why we dedicated this episode to education, and a bit more of a societal problem maybe, but we are tying it directly to the business. And we've had several episodes where we spoke about the main risk that we see for Tesla and our fund is that there is not enough talent out there that has the ability to develop disruptive technologies with large impact, because the hiring process is still very much in firm hands by academia. Academia does not allow for any kind of creative thinking at scale. Of course, there are individuals. David Deutsch is one of them. Elon Musk was part of academia. Drew Balino, Jerome Guillen, all these people, the top executives at Tesla, J.B. Straubel, he was at Stanford. Of course, academia develops unique thinkers, but the kind of waste that we're developing with this mismanaged academia, which means that we have so many people that could have much higher potential and be much more wealth creators than just Me Too innovators and incrementalists. Unfortunately, given the amount of money we're spending on education, we could have much better outcomes. And that is one of the key ingredients that we think is missing right now, for example, with the Tesla innovation stack. It's the human stack. You can't just hire from legacy institutions such as universities and expect people at scale to be innovative. That's going to be very difficult. So this is one of the risks. And to summarize, we think that education is flawed when it comes to wealth creation. Education is not geared towards that. And by the way, it doesn't matter private or public. It's the same anyway. The only difference between public and private education is status and prestigiousness and pedigree. But the actual content is the same. So we chose for our son to give him the base knowledge through public education and Khan and things like that, and then build financial capital by investing in Tesla, and have him develop also in that process throughout the years enough agency, enough of a culture of agency, and enough of a culture of autonomy to hopefully he can create something for himself, something impactful, something that gives him freedom, which in our lingo, as I've said many times, means gives him wealth. And this is the key that we would like to inspire everybody else to think like that, because we believe that for our fund, it is crucial that more and more people develop agency and autonomy and build education stacks around commoditized knowledge and then their uniqueness, so they can build something very valuable and become investees in our companies. Thank you.